Thank you so much, Ari. It's great to be here. The series is called Artifacts of Identity, Exploring Jewish Material Culture Over Time. You may know what art is or Jewish art is, but what is material culture? Material culture is the stuff that we live with. It is actually a broader category, more encompassing category than simply art, because art might be something you hang over your couch, right? But material culture is your street signs and your road signs and your clothes and the way you set your table and every object that is part of your life. When we talk about important objects to Jews, the very first, that sort of headquarters of Jewish important objects is of course, and I say of course because to me it's obvious, but maybe you haven't thought much about it. A box, a rectangular box about, 3 feet by 2 feet, roughly, made of acacia wood, gilded on the inside and outside with gold, and surmounted, as you see in this illustration, to which we'll return, by two very strange figures. This coming on the heels, literally, a couple of chapters after God has told the Israelites not to make a graven, that is three-dimensional image of anything on the earth or the waters beneath the earth or the heavens above the earth, and not to bow down and worship it. And on this box, which is borne on staves, which you see projecting from the sides, there are these two very strange figures that we're going to have to talk about. But this box, as important as it is, does not appear in the earliest representation by others of Jewish material culture. And it's an intriguing absence. And the place from which it is missing, of course, is the Arch of Titus, the triumphal arch built in Rome to commemorate the victory of Vespasian, the emperor, and Titus, his general, over the Jews in Judea. And of course, famously on this relief, which still remains in Rome, you can go see it. What you can't do any longer is what the Roman Jews always used to do, which is piss on it, because they've built a little fence around it. So if you're really skinny, you can get in there and piss. I tried to projectile piss, but it didn't go over very well with the Italian authorities. But you can see this relief, which Steve Fine, in his meticulous and obsessive reconstruction of the arch, has shown us what it looked like originally. So you'll note that there are generals, perhaps, or maybe they're consuls. They're directing the enslaved Jews, who here are walking with staves to indicate their wandering, dispossessed nature, into the city. And there's a triumphal arch that they're passing under, so it's an arch within an arch, right? And it says Leges Judaeorum, which means the delegation of the Jews. And here is the candelabrum, the famous menorah of the temple, the lampstand of the temple. And here's a table, some sort of gold table with cups on it. Perhaps it says Sacra Judaeorum, the sacred objects of the Jews. Perhaps it's the table of the bread of the presence from the temple, or one of them. There were several in the second temple. And here, very distinctly, silver trumpets. But notably missing is the Ark of the Covenant. And the answer to why it's missing is quite elementary. It is because it was not in the second Jerusalem temple. The Ark has a long history in the sacred story, in a once upon a time forever obscured in the midst of history. Tradition tells us that a man named Moses ascended a mountain, and there, in the midst of lightning and thunder and the mountain quaking, Moses communed with God, quote unquote, face to face, as a person might speak with a friend. It's from the famous Sarajevo Haggadah. What's notable about this, besides Moses in the flaming mountain and the wonderful caption, is this fellow here who we see from the back. This is a recent innovation in painting introduced by Giotto, and it appears almost immediately in this manuscript made in Spain. So Moses is on the mountain communing with God as a person communes with a friend. And the souvenirs of this conversation were the 2 tablets of the covenant, Shnei Luchot HaBrit, which are described in miraculous detail in rabbinic literature as having been holographic. Each of the 6 sides, the letters could be read from. They were made of sapphire stone. They were as clear blue. This is when the flames are shining through them, so they're red here. But they could be read from all angles, and the letters remain suspended through the stone in the air, so that the mem sofit, the last letter, the inside part of it, the circular area or this is squared off area, just remains suspended, right? So that was a way of the rabbis of sort of sensationalizing the miraculous nature of these tablets, which were tremendously heavy and tremendously large, and Moses had the supernatural strength to be able to deal with them. They, and both the whole tablets and the fragments of the ones written by the very finger of God. Why were they fragmentary? Well, they were shattered by Moses in his anger or disappointment over the sin of the golden calf. So the shattered ones, the fragments, and the yet whole ones, chiseled by Moses himself, were placed in a chest of gold and acacia wood, which was called the Ark of the Covenant. It's significant, I think, that when the Ark existed, there was a souvenir of the direct human encounter with God, that is the first tablets, but that these were shattered. The direct human encounter of God has been somehow interrupted, as the philosopher Levinas says, and all that is left is sort of fragmentary impressions of that. But what we do have, or what we did have, were the second tablets made by Moses by his own hands, which talks to human agency in continuing this conversation. And as Rabbi Avi Weiss said very poignantly when he was talking about disability, he said that both the shattered tablets, the fragmentary tablets, the unwhole tablets, and the whole tablets were put together in the same ark, because the lesson there is that a community consists of people in varying degrees of wholeness, physically, varying degrees of wholeness mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and the way we take care of each other is to be together under one roof, so to speak. And the ark was placed within the portable tabernacle built around it in the wilderness. And later, in an inner chamber known as the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, in Solomon's magnificent temple in Jerusalem, where it remained until the city and the sanctuary were destroyed by the Babylonians some 600 years before the Common Era, 587 years more accurately. The ark and the tablets disappeared in the midst of history. So our first question is really, what was the form of the ark? What did the ark look like? How do we know? In the book of Exodus, God charges Moses to delegate to a craftsman named Bezalel, son of Eliahab, who was to be the artisan of the tabernacle. Here in this wonderful image by Eileen Winlederer, you see him fashioning the stones that will go in the priestly breastplate, and his assistant there is doing some carving. Behind them is the curtain, one of the curtains with the cherubic creatures, the lion, eagle, ox, and human of Ezekiel's vision. What it says about Bezalel is that he was a visionary person and that he could execute everything that Moses transmitted to him in words in a physical form. There was one item, of course, of the tabernacle that completely confused Moses, because it seemed to be technological. It seems to be a technology, that is, a lampstand that had places to light, right? 7 places to light. And yet it also seemed to be in organic form because it was spoken of as having buds and branches. So this is fabulous bit of rabbinic literature, since in the biblical account, God says to Moses specifically about the menorah, make the form that I have shown you in the mountain or on the mountain. The rabbis 2,000 years ago said Moses figured out everything else, couldn't figure out the menorah. God projected in light, in flame, the image of the menorah on the surface of Mount Sinai so that he could see it and visualize it. That's one of 2 instances that I know of in rabbinic literature in which there's this idea of projection. The other is that when Adam is created, God shows him the entirety of human history. It says, as if on a masach, on a screen, or a pargod, a curtain, and shows it to him in light. So 2,000 years ago, these people were thinking about the cinema, which is appropriate for you crazy Californian people. The ark, as I said, was formed of acacia wood and gold. There is a debate as to where the staves for carrying the ark went, on the short side or the longer side. This is a debate in the Talmud, and as we'll see, it's taken up later. And on top of the ark, there were 2, let's just say 2 winged golden figures. We'll start there, because that's weird enough anyway. One with the face of a man, and the other with the face of a woman, but both with sort of a childish countenance. They are called keruvim. Keruvim, the etymology is in question. One interpretation is keruvia, like children. The other interpretation is keruvim, beings which are near each other or which bring one near to them. And in the ark, as you can see here, were the tablets, the fragments of the tablets, the miraculous rod of Aaron that wrought the miracles in Egypt. It wasn't Moses's rod, it was Aaron's rod that wrought some of the miracles in Egypt. But more to the point, at a time when the servitors were to be chosen for the tabernacle, there was a dispute. The tribe of Levi was told by God that they would be the priests, but the firstborns of the other tribes wanted that privilege. They said, we want to be, the priests. And Moses said, well, you sinned with the golden calf, but the tribe of Levi did not. They said, we still don't accept that. So God told Moses that each tribal head was to bring his totem stick, that is his stick that was unique to his particular tribe. These might have been carved with the symbols of the tribes, we don't know, and to put them in the tabernacle. And they do so overnight. And even though they're dead wood, Aaron's staff, which is made of almond wood, bursts forth with buds and blossoms. And this is a story that's taken up by Christians to talk about the birth of Jesus and about Joseph, Jesus's Mary's husband. But the original story is in the Torah. And as you can see in Eileen Wynn-Lederer's intriguing images, this cutaway, you see the tablets, the fragments, the budding rod of Aaron, and here a little jar of, or tzinsenet as it's called, of mun, not poppy seeds in Yiddish, mun, but mun, which is manna, a sort of seed-like or cottony substance that fell from the sky and nurtured the Israelites in the desert. So there's sort of references to communication with God, the tablets, to divine providence, the manna, and to leadership in the form of the rod, and they're all in the ark. And on top of the ark are these intriguing figures. Now, this is from Moshe Levin's 1971, I believe, book called The Mishkan, the Tabernacle. It's his creative imagining of these creatures. They look like sirens, bird-like, with wings. Some people say that they had lions' bodies with human faces. They were, in effect, sphinxes. that makes a lot of sense. A common combination of lion, eagle, and human that's found throughout the ancient Middle East. But the most intriguing question is, of course, how could these things be created, since God had prohibited the three-dimensional use of sculpture, particularly in worship? So the answer is this. In the tabernacle, there were a number of exceptions to even the most stringent divine rules about materiality. So, for instance, you may or may not know that it is prohibited to every Jew to wear a garment of mixed wool and linen. That is an animal product mixed with a plant product. It's kilayim. It's a mixture that's not proper for reasons that we don't understand, but probably have to do with taboos. The very long-standing, farmer and the cowman dichotomy that goes back to Cain and Abel, and how these realms should be kept separately. But in the temple, as we'll see next time, the garb of the priests, particularly the high priests, was made of mixed wool and linen, specifically to indicate that in the temple there was an exception. So in the temple there was an exception to making sculpted likenesses, but the exception is tempered or mediated here by the fact that these are not creatures that exist on earth or in the waters below or in the sky. These are creatures that exist in the mind, right? Or perhaps in an abstract place called heaven, but we don't see them, right? So that's one dodge, second dodge, right? The first dodge is it's the temple. So if God commands them for the temple, it's fine, right? Just like the mixed wool and linen for the priests. The second dodge is these aren't creatures of our known universe. And the third dodge is that they are not intended for worship, but that there was, and you can't see from this angle, their wings spread up. Now, kadma vazra in trope, right? On the words, their wings spread up. In the Torah, you read, Orsek nafayim lemala, right? That sort of sign to indicate in music the position. And the space between their outstretched wings, the space of a handbreadth. I need three. Wouldn't it be funny, Ari, if a third hand just came up here, like sprung it, right? So I need a hand on this side, right? But the space of a handbreadth from between their wings, that was the space from which the voice of God spoke. So the voice of God did not speak from the tabernacle, and it did not speak from the Holy of Holies, and it did not speak from the ark, and it did not speak from the cover on the ark, and it did not speak from the golden angels or sphinxes, but it spoke from the void, the empty space between the wings of the angels, which represented the ineluctable presence of God, right? In, so to speak, absence. So what was the location? What are we talking about here? Well, first of all, the tabernacle. I gave an exam the other day in my Jesus class. I teach a class called Jesus, A Radical Life. I've taught some of that stuff here. And my students talked about the Sadducees, the priestly class, who, quote unquote, on the exam, they wrote, they like to go to the temples. They went to temples on the Sabbath. In other words, they were thinking, when I said the word the temple in class, their association was with, a liberal synagogue, which is called a temple. And I realized that was my error. I sort of assumed that when I said the temple, they understood it to be the Jerusalem temple in which the Sadducees or priests worked. So I thought I should go into a little bit into location. The tabernacle was a portable ensemble that moved with the Israelite camp, which you see here all around it in the desert. It could be taken down and put back up. Here, Moses and Aaron are contemplating the ark in this Christian depiction. Christians were obsessed with the ark for a lot of reasons, from archaeological to typological. We'll explain what typological means soon. And this is the building, the construction of the tabernacle. And of course, it wouldn't have been like this. The ark wouldn't have just sat on a hill, and Moses's tablets wouldn't have been lying on the ground. But this is sort of a Christian critique of the what we call material culture, but they would probably think of thinginess, the excessive thinginess, the Jews with all their things, right? Christians have it in their heart. They have a tabernacle in their heart, but the Jews are full of stuff, right? And that's why everything's kind of a jumble here. And, so there's a critique in this image as well. But I wanted to show you the tabernacle being assembled on one of its trips. Moshe Levine's tabernacle here in a small modeled version with the fence and its covers. And this is the building of the tabernacle. And in the tabernacle itself, a larger rectangular section with the menorah seen from the top, 3 steps leading up to the menorah, the milkachayim, the tongs, and the oil cruse, or maybe it's the container for holding the used wicks, the table for the bread of the presence, a curtain, and here the holiest place. And the staves of the ark, we are told in Masechet Menachot, in the Babylonian Talmud, also in Yoma, that the staves projected into the curtain so that the form one saw when one was standing in the holy place, nobody went into the holiest place except on special occasions, was the shape of a woman's breasts in her peplos, in her dress, right? So, and certain ceremonial was conducted between the projecting staves of the ark to sort of signal the surrounding feminine presence, the Shekhinah, the indwelling of God, and God's nurturing presence too, in the sense of breast. Once the Israelites settled in the land of promise, in Eretz Israel, the ark rested in several places because of various wars and conquests, before King Solomon actually built a temple, and we'll be talking about the temple next time. David wanted to build the temple, but Solomon ended up building it, and he built it on Mount Moriah, Har HaMoriah, the mountain of seeing, of vision, of future vision, where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac, and God promised that this would be a place of redemption. And the mountain, of course, still is there. It is covered. The rock of sacrifice, which became, in some opinions, the rock of sacrifice in the temple, became a center for Muslims, eventually in the Muslim conquest, and a dome, the Kibbutz As-Sakra, was built on top of that rock. And it is not a mosque. It is not a mosque. It is a monument, but a sacred place for Muslims as well. And Solomon's temple was a relatively small building with some unique features, such as a water well in the courtyard that was borne on the backs of 12 gigantic bronze oxen, and not auctions. Auctions means a stubborn person, but an ox, right, is here. And these wheeled portable kiorim, water receptacles, the outdoor altar of sacrifice, the pipe system that brought water from the Shiloach stream to the temple, and the 2 columns at the entrance to the Solomon's temple, which were called Yachin, establishment, and Boaz, power is there, or force or strength is there. And then interesting feature of the Holy of Holies of Solomon's temple was that the ark, which you see here, and here you see the scale of a person, was surmounted by gigantic sphinxes or kruvim that filled the entire space. The ark was not revealed to people in general. We'll talk about it at the end when it was. But it was a place where, for instance, between the staves of the ark, when the king needed a question to answered, and here's the king of Israel with a crown, and he has wrapped around his arm a miniature Torah scroll in a case, because the king was required to write a Torah scroll for himself and wear it on his person at all times. And here is the high priest who is consulting with the voice of God between the wings of the cherubim. But how does God speak? Not in perceptible human language, but through the letters on the breastplate. So the high priest would speak to God and then look down at the breastplate, and the breastplate had all the letters of the alphabet, right? And they would light up or they would pulse. So there was something that appeared to him visually to give answers to these questions. The breastplate itself was illuminated by the Urim Vetumim. Nobody knows what those are, but they were clearly a receptor for the, let's be metaphorically a receptor for the metaphorical radio waves of God's voice that were emerging from the ark. So that the ark is an important place where decisions were rendered, consultation was had with the high priest. And of course, the most important encounter, so to speak, with the ark, again, between the staves, was the high priest burning incense in front of the ark on a red hot shovel on the Day of Atonement. That was the one day a year where the holiest person, the high priest, went into the holiest place and burnt incense in front of the ark, so that a cloud of smoke, which represented God's presence, would fill the temple. And the high priest would also, on that occasion, sprinkle with his finger the blood of the sacrifices of the day on the ark. So that was part of the avodah, of the worship service of the high priest on the Day of Atonement. Just a quick side note, it's very interesting to think about the fact that the Ark of the Covenant was surmounted by these winged creatures. But if we go today, if we go today to a synagogue, we will often see a pair of lions. This is from Kansas City, by the way, accompanying the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, on top of the Ark of the Law. So the Ark of the Covenant was in the temple, first temple. The Ark of the Law is what's in our synagogues today, and often accompanied by lions. So people ask the question, or I ask the question, I should say, why is it always a pair of lions? You never see one lion, right? In fact, in earlier Jewish art, like this gold glass from Rome, which is fascinating, you have a lampstand, a menorah, right? You have a jug for oil. You have an etrog, a citron for use on the holiday of Sukkot, and a lulav, also for that use. You have a shofar. You have two lions here, and you have two birds, and they are sort of standing on little balls and attached with strings in their beaks to the top of this strange cabinet, which is open and has 9 scrolls in it. The scrolls are rolled and facing us. Do you see that? So those birds represent the cherubs on top of the ark. You weren't allowed to make an image of the cherubs. But the lions are there also. And this is a transitional moment because this gold glass was made at a time when Jews spoke Aramaic. And in Aramaic, the word for Torah, as in the Torah ark, was oraita. The word for a lion, as in Hebrew, was ari, like our friend Ari Katz. But the word for a pair of lions was aryavata. And aryavata is spelled almost identically to oraita, Torah. So when an Aramaic-speaking Jew saw 2 lions, for that person, it sounded like, it chimed with, it rhymed with the word for Torah. And that's how the cherubs became the lions on our ark. Now, the second temple is much more intriguing because, in fact, it was an empty sanctuary. The holiest part, and here's the building, this is Herod's building. In Jerusalem, we can reconstruct it with a fair degree of accuracy, as we'll talk about next time. There are even actual fragments of the building of the temple in existence, although most people don't know about them because they're hidden away in an obscure museum. And we'll talk about that next time. Large building, very magnificent in many ways, but I'll get to that next time. But here is how it was configured. The Echal itself, the building itself here. There are many outbuildings and many courts and many levels of sanctuary and sanctity and approach. But here is the holy place where the priest generally could go. Here's the outer courtyard. Here's the steps on which the 400-piece Levitical orchestra would play. Here's the outer courtyard where you would bring your sacrifice. Here's the inner building, number 3, where only the priests could go, the Kodesh. And here's the Kodesh HaKadoshim. You know what was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim in the second temple? Nothing. Nada. Klum, shum, zilch, zero. And, during the first temple, the pagans used to joke about the Jews because nobody ever saw what was in their sanctum sanctorum, their holy of holiest places. They used to say, what did the Jews worship in their temple in Jerusalem? And the answer was, the head of an ass. Right? Nice anti-Jewish joke. Okay. But in the second temple, it was even better for the anti-Semites, because they could ask this question: what do Jews worship in their temple in Jerusalem? And the answer was absolutely nothing, because the holiest place in the temple of Jerusalem, the second temple, was utterly devoid of statuary, of anything that indicated the divine presence except the divine presence. So ironically, it's in the emptiness that God is present. And what's really interesting is that this is funny to non-Jews, to pagans in that period, to Hellenistic polytheists, because they can't imagine a temple. Here's the temple of on the Acropolis, right? They can't imagine a temple without a 40-foot statue, gilded, painted in gold, and right. It's. I mean, the scale of this was what was awesome. The statue of Athena, right? The Nike, the little angel that she held in her hand, was 6 feet tall, right? So to imagine a place in which the holiest place was absolutely empty was absolutely hilarious for people who were used to this. But the absence of the ark is a theme throughout history. And it's a theme that's very intriguing because it implies that there is something special, in fact, about the emptiness. When the group of sages who convened to decide what would go in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew scriptures. Oh, you didn't know, right? You think about it. There was a time in history when there were hundreds of books of scripture, some in Greek, some like the life of Adam and Eve, or the testament of the 12 patriarchs, or whatever the hell, right? Some were in Greek, some were in Aramaic. So, right, at a certain point in history, people sat down, smart people, let's call them sages, sat down after the temple had been destroyed in Yavne, northern Israel, the year 90, 20 years after the temple was destroyed, and actually decided on the canon of scripture, what would go into scripture. And I've told you this before, but it bears repeating. Most of the books that we know, were no-brainers. The 5 books of Moses, everybody knew about them. That went in, right? There were some books about which there were questions because they decided to keep out all books in Greek. So the books of the Maccabees were not included. They were part of what were called the Apocrypha, the non-canonical writings, right? So no Greek books. But what about Aramaic books? So the books of Daniel and Ezra and Nehemiah have varying degrees, Daniel the most, of Aramaic, which is not Hebrew, even though you can write it in Hebrew characters, right? And it's close in sound in some way. If I say to you, and I don't know, we were talking about oxen, right? So in Hebrew, an ox is shore, right? In Aramaic, it's tor, right? You have it in Chad Gadya, which is written in late Pseudo-Aramaic, the Ata Torah, the Shatalamaya, right? And then a tor, a shore, an ox came and drank the water. So they said, okay, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, they can all go in the Bible. How about very late books like the Book of Esther, right? Moreover, the name of God doesn't even appear in the Book of Esther. No, that can go in. It's important, right? It's about how they tried to kill us. God saved us. Let's eat. Very important. Except that God doesn't save us, right? We save us in the Book of Esther. And then there were a couple of books like Ecclesiastes, which was really depressing, and the Song of Songs, which was too sexy, that they wanted to keep out of the Bible. In the case of the Song of Songs, Rabbi Akiva got up and he said, the whole world and everything that is within it is not worth the day on which the Song of Songs was given to Israel. Because if all the scriptures you've already included in the canon are holy, the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies. So you might at first think that Rabbi Akiva is talking in hyperbolic metaphor. Song of Songs, meaning the greatest of all songs. Holy of Holies, meaning the most holy. In fact, the Song of Songs, with its poetic verses describing what appears to be the dalliance of lovers in a what's it called, paradisical garden, seemed to the rabbis to be a secular work and not worthy of inclusion in the canon, right? Their proof for it is that the name of God never appears. Like God is embarrassed to show God's self in the midst of all this apparently hedonistic abandon. But Rabbi Akiva stands up and says that it is the Holy of Holies. Now, I believe that Rabbi Akiva's assertion that the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies is not just a hyperbolic statement. He's not just using the term Holy of Holies as a superlative in parallel to Song of Songs. It seems to me he's using the Holy of Holies as a simile in which he addresses the specific concerns that this Song of Songs was too earthy, not spiritual enough. And in fact, in Rabbi Akiva's time, the temple that he would have known, even though the Ark of the Covenant was a long-lost artifact, stolen long ago by the Babylonians, the Holy of Holies in the temple that Akiva would have known was completely empty of any object or symbol. But Akiva understood the loss of the Ark, while a heavy one, to precipitate the emptiness of the Holy of Holies, because that emptiness became a powerful symbol of the immanent nature of God. So when he says the Song of Songs, which is apparently empty of the name of God and seems like a space that's empty, it's just goats and people having sex and admiring the beauty of their partners, right? He says, no, don't you get it? That is the Holy of Holies. Nature and human relationships are the space in which God is found. Just like the Holy of Holies in the temple, though empty of the ark, is pregnant with the presence of God. The ark was an important symbol in war. For instance, the Bar Kokhba rebellion coins were minted with an image of the ark in the middle of the temple facade. And you can see these two projecting little round balls, which represent the staves of the ark. Remember, the staves of the ark were important. In the Bible, the ark goes before the Israelites to war, and in the war with the Philistines, it's captured, as we see in Dura Europos, one of the earliest examples of art made for Jews, and kept by the Philistines until or Philistines, Bernstein, until a plague strikes them and they return the ark. So it was important. It went out before the Israelites into war. That's why we say, right? Vayhi bin Soa Aaron, when the ark began to move, Moses would say, Kuma Hashem, get up Hashem, v'yafutzu oidecha, and may your enemies be scattered, v'yanusu bisanecha mipanecha, and those who hate you, may they be driven from before you, right? Because the ark was going forth. Very intriguing 8th century Scythian plate found in Russia, depicts the siege of Jericho by Joshua. And centrally here, this is made for an historian Christian, centrally here you see the ark and people blowing trumpets. And the idea of the ark going forth to war, here it says Arcade, the ark of the Lord. In Christian art, this is the Philistine battle, was also very important. Christians loved the ark and loved the ark. It was a feature of medieval manuscripts. Here we have David bringing the ark to Jerusalem, very popular theme, and dancing in front of the ark, which he does in his underwear and embarrasses his wife. It's a whole story that I won't get into. But the ark looks like a Christian reliquary, and that's why Christians liked it, because they saw in the ark, right, the sort of pre-representation of objects in their own churches. I'll be writing about this in my next book, not the one that will be published next year, but I'm writing a book called Jewish Spaces in Christian Art. More examples from the Renaissance. Medieval Jews also depicted the temple, sometimes very schematically. This is the curtain of the temple with lions and eagles at the beginning of the book of Vayikra, more accurately, the tabernacle. But the ark is less commonly depicted, or almost not depicted at all, right? Interest in Baroque, more fantastic depictions by Christians. The cherubs on the ark always look like they're in mourning in Christian art. Here they are, sadly covering their faces for some reason. In the Middle Ages, there was also even a guy named Nicholas of Lyra, who lived in the 12th century, who was a fan of Rashi, Rabbi Solomon Yitzchaki. And Rashi, as you know, was very interested in the positions of all the objects of the tabernacle and what they look like, right? And so here, these are two diagrams from woodcuts in a book of Nicholas of Lyra. And you see here it says, Figura arche expiationis secundum Rabbi Salomonis, the figure of the Ark of the Covenant as depicted by Rabbi Solomon, meaning Rashi, right? And then here it says, aliquas doctores. This is other rabbis' depictions with the angels standing sort of over it. So there was a fascination of Christians, which we'll talk about in a second. Why? Here's some other versions of Nicholas of Lyra's book. And you can see here the Ark of the Testimony, and he quotes Rashi and Rambam. Here's another example. You can see the Ark here and the table of the shewbread. There were, among Christians primarily, sort of proto-archaeologies of the Ark, trying to think about what it actually looked like on the basis of sources, and it always ends up looking styled like the period. So in the Baroque Enlightenment period, here you have it. Here's the rod, here's the manna, and here are the angels. But the thing looks like a piece of furniture that Ari could buy at a temple auction and claim it's Louis XIV's, right? Again, the sad Christian angels. There's an emphasis on bearing the ark and how the ark, representing God's presence to the Jews, is heavy and weighs down upon the Jews in Christian art. There's Orientalisms, so these 19th century illustrations, which really come out of Baghdad or Cairo. English and French artists they're searching for a metaphor to show this important sacred object and the ceremonies around it. And what they find is the contemporary Arab world. And they sort of style the ancient Israelites as contemporary Arabs. Most famous is Tissot, the French artist, who did, I think, very arresting and skillful depictions. This is the Ark crossing the Jordan. And this is Moses and Aaron, who for some reason slung his breastplate over his shoulder, worshiping before the ark. And of course, in each case, the ark looks like something from an Egyptian tomb, because Egyptian tombs were being excavated at that point, and they found various furniture, the tomb of Tutankhamun and others, so that, you know, the idea of the ark as a sort of Egyptian thing comes into currency. The ark is used by Christians as a symbol always of something else. So here's a high priest who looks kind of Jesus-like, right? Spreading the blood on the ark, right? In churches, Saint-Germain-des-Prés has a depiction of both the large cherubs and the ones on top of the ark. And that is because Mary, as the vessel carrying Jesus, is herself considered to be the ark. The ark anticipates, in Christian ideas, Mary, right? So Mary is called the vessel, and sometimes there are in churches. Here's a really kitschy image of the ark with the cherubs on the outside and Mary on top of the lid as sort of representative of the ark. Here's a parade in Jerusalem, and you can see the banner that says Yeshua on it. And Christians from all over the world on the last day of Sukkot come to Jerusalem and they celebrate their Christianness and its alleged connections with Judaism, because it is said that all the nations of the world will one day come up and celebrate. But of course, it is an occasion for some of them to proselytize. Speaking of which, there is a fellow in Brazil who looks like a Lubavitcher, but is a Pentecostal preacher of this type, makes his daughters skip college so they wouldn't be smarter than their husbands, who built this in Rio de Janeiro. It's a expanded scale version of the Temple of Jerusalem. And I know you don't know Portuguese, but it is worth, look at how he dresses. Polyester tallis, Chabad beard, except when he doesn't have it. He's a real character. He raises a lot of money, and he built this. You don't know Portuguese, but just watch.
Agora temos aqui a imagem do templo toda iluminada, ao som desta música bonita.
A que dia?
A que dia? É verdade.
A vara de Arão que floresceu e frutificou e um recipiente com um pouco do maná. Esses objetos, Nathan, eles representavam momentos marcantes do relacionamento de Deus com o povo de Israel, lembrando os extraordinários milagres realizados durante a peregrinação.
Oh, sorry, I missed. Okay. That's just, there are thousands of people there, but this ark from the Rio de Janeiro Temple of Solomon is coming to you.
The Ark was introduced in the Temple of Solomon in the first day of its opening. And as it happened in biblical days, God began to manifest himself extraordinarily.
Hallelujah.
Since then, people came from all over the world to experience this power.
My name is Arnis Bransmanis, and I'm from Rochester, New York.
I'm from Taiwan.
Australia.
Liechtenstein.
Australia.
New York. My name is Hanan Zaiderman from Israel.
I'm from Trinidad and Tobago.
And now...
Hello everyone, we are here outside the Temple of Solomon. The Ark of the Covenant will visit 5 continents, and the first continent will be North America, more precisely the United States, Texas.
It's time for Texas to receive the same blessing, the same power, the same experience with the God of the Bible. 5313 Martin Luther King Boulevard.
Wow, huh? Pretty impressive. Well, folks, I have more to say about the Ark and where it is, but we're going to have to reserve that for next time, because some people say it's in the Vatican, some people say it's in Ethiopia, some people say it's in the basement of 77 Raymond Avenue, Poughkeepsie, New York. I can't say, and I'm not saying, but next time I will discuss with you the present whereabouts of the Ark and its functionality as part of popular culture, including the perhaps I would say perhaps well known to you Ark of the Covenant as it appears in Raiders of the Lost Ark, And as you yourself, should you wish, can order a reproduction of. Ari, do you want to dress up like this and have the Ark of the Covenant in your own house? But all of that, including intriguing questions like, is the Ark of the Covenant in this church in Ethiopia? What are these mysterious objects held by its priests? And is the location of the Ark known to the very right-wing Israeli protagonists of the Temple Institute in Jerusalem? Those, my friends, are questions that I hope to address next time, but for now, I will entertain questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for taking us on a tour of the Ark through Jewish, but also Christian culture.
It's not over yet. I'm going to have to continue next time.
I know people are now stressing
yes.
out. They're lining up outside the office for next week already.
To be healed of they're going to jump up and down to be healed of their foot tumors.
Here's a few questions for you. Number one, just a random question. Shore to tour, to the Greek word for ox, taurus. Is that a connection or is that completely random?
Taurus is a Greek word, and it's yeah, I think it's a connection because the primal words, the sort of one syllable, words for animals of power, for instance, are common in many cultures. I'm not a Greek expert, but I think there is a connection.
Do other cultures have this ark concept, what they would take with them out to battles?
So many cultures have sacred objects that they take to battles. In fact, there was a group called the Templars, which who were very kind of important in the Middle Ages. They're a mysterious group, but they were obsessed because their headquarters was in the Holy Land. They were obsessed with the Ark of the Covenant. And their leaders had various visions of the Ark as a mega structure, of course, very Christian, right? And they claimed to know where it was hidden. We'll talk a little bit more about Templar fantasy next time. But there are a variety of indigenous and tribal cultures who, of course, have their own sacred objects. In fact, the most common use of sacred objects outside of a temple context is, in fact, using them, bringing them to war as talismans, and in order to give people hope, right? The object goes out before the people who are warring.
There was a question about the imagery of the Ark, what's on the Ark, and what you showed, other people have seen in Egyptian art. You mentioned it. And which came first, I guess. The question is it interesting? Is it interesting and more than interesting to have this imagery that very much looks like Egyptian art, Egyptian boxes? When I went online to buy stuff to decorate our Pesach table years ago, I literally found this Egyptian box. I don't know what it was. It wasn't of the Ark, but it looked like what you showed.
So
but it was Egyptian.
Right, in Tutankhamun's tomb, they found things like that. Look, everybody needs a chair to sit on, right? So Ari, I know you sit in very fancy modern chairs designed by Michael Graves and famous architects, right? I sit on an IKEA wooden stool, right? But they're both recognizable as chairs. It's a matter of style. It makes sense that if the Israelites came out of Egypt and they had for 200 or more years been looking at chairs and bowls and boxes, right, and chests and other accoutrements of life in the Egyptian style, that's the style in which the Ark would have been constructed. So it's possible that ancient Ark, constructed after the Exodus, was the same one that made its way to Jerusalem. But it's also possible that the Ark was redesigned in Roman style, contemporary Hellenistic style. And we don't really know if it was the same Ark. Religious people would like to think it was, but archaeologists are really not sure of anything. So yes, Jews, as I say, are like tofu, and wherever you put them, they assimilate the style of their neighbors. So if they needed a box to put the luchot in, it would have been very likely in an Egyptian style. I just want to address something I see here of the crafts at Kaufman's. The Ark was not exposed as you see in these reconstructions when it traveled, but it was covered with a techelet covering. So nobody saw the Ark. Even the priest didn't see it. When the priest covered the Ark with the covering, I believe they had to approach it backwards, right? So nobody saw it except the high priest on the Day of Atonement.
Cool. People asked about the artist Eileen Wynn Lederer.
Yes.
I'm quite interested in her. Anything you can share about her?
Eileen is very talented. She is a Philadelphia-based artist. She did a book called Between Heaven and Earth, in which she has these very intriguing illustrations like the ones that I showed you. She's an exquisite talent as a draftsperson and very learned, intelligent person. I have commissioned banners for our sukkah of all the patriarchs and matriarchs from her. She did those specially for us that are very, very beautiful. You should look her up, Wynn, W-I-N-N, Lederer, L-E-D-E-R-E-R. And she has quite a few books out, one called The Book of Blessings, one called Between Heaven and Earth. These are, I think, important junctures in the art made by Jews in the 21st century. My book, Skies of Parchment, Seas of Ink, features some of her work, and the frontispiece of the book has an image that she designed called, not the cover, but the frontispiece, called If All the Skies Were Parchment and All the Seas Were Ink, Still We Could Not Write and every person a scribe by trade, still we could not write the glory of God, which comes from the poem for Shavuot called the Akdamut. She's a very talented person.
Thank you for bringing your art to us. We are in overtime. Let me ask one last question. So as I opened, I mentioned that you spoke recently at the Library of Congress and didn't invite any of us to it. Can you tell us what you spoke at the Library of Congress about?
There's an artist called Yoel Ben Shimon, who's one of the only artists between Betzalel in the Bible, who we met today, and Marc Chagall of Paris and Vitebsk, whose name is known to us. And he was an artist who lived in the 15th century and wandered. He took jobs both in Ashkenaz, where he was from, Franco-Germany, and in Italy. We can sort of trace his trajectory, and people like him because, you know, people want to know like more historical information. I'm interested in what he does with women in his Haggadot, because there's an interesting phenomenon that, as we say in yeshiva, by maror, meaning on the page in which maror, the bitter herb, is discussed, right? The pater familias, the man of the house, is holding some romaine lettuce, which is what they use for maror, but he's also pointing at his wife to indicate that she, his ball and chain, his old lady, she's the sauce. She's more bitter than the bitterest bitter herb. She's a bitter pill to swallow. So I asked, like, what's going on in this book? And, you know, most of what people have written is that it's misogynist, but, you know, you don't have to be the most sensitive person to see that it's misogynist. I actually have a different argument because I think that the book was made for a woman. So I contextualized it in the context of his other art, etc. I could come on here and talk about that at some point if you want. I have some new spins and stuff that I didn't talk about at the Library of Congress. So if there's popular outcry from you 87 people, because 2 of you got lost apparently with the Ark, you should tell Ari, and he'll bring me for a special Pesach discussion of that book and other women in Haggadot.
Thank you. So before we end, just can you give us just like a promo, what's coming up in the rest of the series, not just next week?
Sure. Next week I'm gonna finish up talking about the Ark, because there's some really fascinating and intriguing stuff to share about where the Ark might be, if it is anywhere. And then I'll talk about the temple itself, because usually what we're told is that the temple was utterly destroyed and no stone stands on any other stone. But in fact, there are several stones that remain from the second temple, and they are stones that, so to speak, talk and can tell us a lot. In fact, they corroborate in a very unusual instance, since we have not a sandal lace of Abraham, not a belt of Sarah, and not a nose hair of Jesus, right? Although we have some foreskins in different places of Jesus, but that's another story. We have very little archaeological evidence for stuff that's mentioned in the Bible. And although the second temple is not mentioned in the Bible, it's mentioned in historians contemporary with its existence. And the material culture that we found is consonant. It reinforces what we learned from those textual, not sexual, textual sources. So I hope to see you all next week, and look forward. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you, Marc Michael Epstein, or Dr. Epstein,
Whatever.
Professor Epstein.
Professor, doctor, whatever. It's all good. Hi, Mom.
I
All
will.
right.
Hi, Mom. Hi to Mark's mom. And we will look forward to seeing you next week with CSP. Thank you for joining us at this late hour on the West Coast. It's almost bedtime for some of us. It's 5 o'clock.
Bye-bye. It's almost bedtime for me.
I gotta go home and feed my children and
Okay,
tell them about
feed
the
them.
Ark. I'll show them pictures about the Ark tonight. They're too young for Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's actually pretty scary.
Yeah, actually, I agree. Anyway,
This gets pretty violent, but it's got some stuff. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Take care. And we'll see you soon.